I read the report from the EMS crew out of Houston first. They logged the call at 10:42 in the morning on May 22nd. The heat index in the third ward was already pushing triple digits. The narrative says a 33-year-old male was down on a residential site, no pulse, non-responsive. I've been running near-death experiences for several years now, and usually the medical side is where the story starts to blur into generalities, but for Kwame, the numbers were the only thing staying still. The record shows 8 minutes of flatline, 8 minutes where the machines didn't register a single spark of life. But Kwame, I found something in what he sent us that doesn't match the silence of those monitors. He wasn't in Houston anymore. He wasn't even in our current year. I've spent the last week looking at the timestamps of his collapse, trying to find where the physics of a job site in Texas ends and where this other place begins. The glass was humming. That's what I remember first. Not the pain, just this low-frequency vibrate that felt like it was coming out of the sidewalk and rattling my teeth. I was standing in the middle of a plaza that looked like it'd been poured by a crew from 100 years in the future. The buildings were all glass, but it wasn't the stuff we hang on a commercial job. There weren't any mullions, no joints, just these massive, curved sheets of something clear that went up until the sky turned a bruised kind of black. The people moving past me didn't look like they were in a rush, but they were all locked into something. I watched a woman walk toward a pillar made of some white, polished stone. She didn't reach for a badge. She didn't even slow down. This blue light, thin as a pencil lead, just snapped across her face. Zip. A green light pulsed deep inside the stone, and the wall didn't open. It just stopped being solid. She walked right through. I tried to move my feet, but my work boots felt like they were cast in concrete. I looked down, and the pavement was glowing. There were these tiny circuits, silver and gold, running just under the surface like the veins in your arm. Everything was tracked. Everything was connected. I could feel the system trying to find me. It was like a static charge on my skin, looking for a place to land. I'm in the third ward. The sun is mean. It's beating on the back of my neck, and I can smell the chemical sourness of the treated pine wood on my shoulder. I'm carrying a load of 2x4s toward the back of the fourplex we're framing. My hands are slippery with sweat. I remember thinking I needed to drop the load and dry my palms on my jeans before I lost my grip. Then the sky didn't just go dark. It went out, like a master breaker flipped on the whole world. My knees hit the dirt first. I could feel the gravel grinding into my skin, but I couldn't put my hands out to break the fall. My arms were just locked. I was pinned under the weight of the lumber, face first in the dust, and I couldn't even get enough air to grunt. And then the weight was gone. Not like someone lifted the wood off me, like the lumber, the site, the heat, it all just evaporated. I was back on that glowing pavement in the glass city. But I wasn't just a guy standing there anymore. I was seeing the guts of the place. Being a builder, you look at things different. You don't see the paint, you see the framing. And I was seeing the framing of this world. It was a grid, a total digital cage. I saw a man buy a coffee at a stand that didn't have a register. He just looked at a lens, his account, his name, his medical history, his whole life. It all flashed in a halo around his head for a split second. The transaction was done before he even took the cup. I saw the same thing at a train station. People pressing their palms against glass panels, no cash, no cards, just their bodies being used as the key to the economy. My heart was thumping against my ribs so hard I thought it'd crack a bone. I knew what I was looking at. I've read the book. I grew up in a house where the Sunday service wasn't a suggestion, but seeing the infrastructure already laid out, it wasn't a story anymore. It was a blueprint. I noticed how Kwame describes that transition. He doesn't say he floated away or followed a light. He says the world evaporated. For someone who spends his life calculating the weight of materials and the grade of a foundation, the sudden loss of gravity isn't a relief. It's a structural failure. I've read through his description of that grid city 3 times, and every time I'm struck by how he's looking at the framing of the vision. He's not seeing a utopia of convenience. He's seeing a build that hasn't reached Houston yet, but the foundation is already poured and cured. I reached out to touch one of the glass walls, but my hand wouldn't go near it. It was like two magnets pushing apart. I couldn't participate because I didn't have the mark. I didn't have the scan. I was a ghost in their machine. Then the humming stopped. The whole city went silent, and the black sky above the glass towers started to peel back. It looked like a tarp being pulled off a roof. Behind the sky, there wasn't space. There was fire, not the kind that burns a house down, not orange and smoky. This was white. It was so bright it felt like it was stripping the skin off my face. I covered my eyes with my forearms, but the light went right through the meat and the bone. I could see the shadows of my own skeleton against my eyelids. I wasn't in the city anymore. I was rising. The air turned thick. It felt like I was swimming through wet wool. I tried to kick, tried to find some purchase, but there was nothing to grab. The higher I went, the louder the sound got. It wasn't the humming of the city. It was a roar, like 1,000 jet engines starting up at once. I saw them then. They weren't the angels you see on a Christmas card. They weren't soft. They were massive, shaped like men, but made of moving brass and lightning. They were standing in a circle around the white fire, and the sheer power coming off them made me want to shrink into nothing. I felt like a handful of dust being held up in a hurricane. One of them turned. It didn't have a face like ours, just a burning center where the eyes should be. It looked right through me, and I felt every lie I'd ever told, every corner I'd ever cut on a job, every time I'd stayed silent when I should have spoken. It all just bubbled up to the surface. I couldn't hide it. I was a bare frame standing in the middle of an inspection, and I knew I wasn't up to code. I tried to look away, but the light was everywhere. And then, right in the center of the white fire, a figure started to move. I've been going back through the notes I took when Kwame first reached out. He didn't lead with the fire or the angels. He kept talking about the grade of the pavement in that city and how the light moved inside the stone. I think his brain was trying to find a way to measure a world that doesn't use a standard tape. Usually people who have these experiences come back talking about the feeling of it, but Kwame is different. He's looking at the load-bearing capacity of the vision. He's looking at how it's anchored to our world. I found a specific detail in his description of the global scan that I haven't been able to shake. He describes it like a concrete pour that's happening while we're all sleeping, a foundation for something that doesn't have a door to get out. The figure in the fire didn't walk toward me. It was more like the distance between us just stopped existing. 1 second I was looking at a shape in the white heat, and the next I could feel the heat on my collar. My jaw was clamped so tight I thought I'd snap a molar. I couldn't swallow. I looked at his feet. That's all I could manage. He was wearing something simple, but it didn't look like cloth. It looked like woven light, if that makes sense. And he wasn't standing on the ground. We were suspended in that white roar. He didn't speak with a voice. It was a weight in my head. He showed me the city again, but it was bigger this time. It wasn't just one plaza. It was a map of the whole planet, but it looked like a CAD drawing, all blue lines and pulsing nodes. I saw Singapore. I knew it was Singapore because of those massive trees they built out of steel and plants. I saw the people there, and the grid was thick. It was like a blanket of blue light laid over the whole island. Every person was a dot on the screen. Every dot had a string attached to it, running back to a central hub. Then I saw Dubai, those gold towers sticking up out of the sand like luxury spikes. I saw the wealthy people moving through malls that looked like palaces. They were scanning their irises to open doors. They were paying for watches and cars by waving a hand over a sensor. They thought they were the owners, but from where I was standing, I could see the strings on them too. The figure pointed, and my gaze shifted to China. This was different. The grid there was heavy. It was tight. I saw the cameras on every pole, every corner. I saw the facial recognition boxes snapping onto every person in the crowd. It looked like a cage made of math. If someone's score went down, the blue line turned red, and the moment it turned red, the world stopped working for them. They couldn't buy a bus ticket. They couldn't enter a grocery store. The system just shut them out. I tried to pull back. I felt like I was falling through the floor of a high rise. I reached out for something to grab, but my hands just passed through the white air. He showed me the United States. My home. Houston. It was coming there too. It was already being poured. I saw the bank branches closing down in the third ward. I saw the ATMs being ripped out and the new cashless signs going up in the windows of the stores where I buy my lunch. Most people were smiling. They were using their phones, using their watches, talking about how easy it was. But I saw the framing underneath. It was a total lock. If you don't have the digital ID, you don't exist. If the government doesn't like what you said on the job site or in the church pew, they flip a bit in a server and your money isn't yours anymore. You're standing in a world full of food and you can't buy a single loaf of bread. My chest felt like someone was standing on it. I've seen what happens when a structure isn't plumb. It looks fine for a while, but the stress builds up in the corners until the whole thing buckles. And this world, the stress was everywhere. I've been sitting with Kwame's description of those central hubs, and it reminded me of a comment I read a few months back. A user named HeavyLifting71 left a message on our video about the digital identification pilot in Europe. He said that the loudest part of the whole system isn't the technology. It's the silence of the people accepting it because it makes their morning commute 30 seconds faster. Kwame is the same thing. He's seeing the convenience being used as a lubricant for the lock. It's something I think about every time I use a biometric login now. I wonder if I'm just helping them finish the pour. I tried to find words. I wanted to ask him if it was too late. I wanted to know if the building was already topped out or if we could still change the plans. My mouth finally moved, but the sound that came out was a dry rasp. I said, "It's a trap." The figure moved then. A hand, solid, warm, with scars that looked like they'd been there since the beginning of time, came toward my face. I didn't flinch. I couldn't. He said, "You see the foundation." I felt a jolt go through me, like I'd touched a live wire on a wet slab. I saw the cities again, but this time they were crumbling. The glass was shattering and falling like rain. The blue lines were snapping. The central hubs were dark. He said, "Nothing built by man is level." I realized then that he wasn't showing me a prediction. He was showing me a reality. We think we're building this permanent high-tech future, but it's all sitting on sand. The whole digital cage, it was nothing compared to the white fire. It was a paper house standing in a gale. But then he showed me the people, not the crowds, the individuals. I saw a man in a small room reading a worn-out Bible by a flashlight. The grid was all around him, trying to find him, trying to tag him, but he was quiet. He wasn't afraid. He was anchored to something else. I saw a woman in a grocery store being told her account was inactive. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She just looked at the cashier with a kind of pity that made my skin crawl. She knew something the system didn't. I wanted to be like them. I wanted to know how to unhook my string from the hub. I looked at the figure in the fire. My eyes were watering from the light, but I didn't blink. I said, "How do I fix my foundation?" He didn't give me a list of rules. He didn't give me a job to do. He just looked at me, and I felt the white fire start to move inside my own chest. It wasn't burning me, it was clearing out the rot. I've been reading accounts for this channel for a long time, but I keep coming back to the way Kwame describes this inspection. Usually people talk about a life review like a movie playing on a screen. For Kwame, it was a structural audit, right? He's a guy who knows what it's like to have a city inspector walk onto a site and find the one bolt that isn't torqued down or the one header that's a quarter-inch off plumb. I noticed how his voice changes when he starts talking about the fire. He isn't describing a sunset. He's describing the feeling of being stripped back to the studs. I found myself wondering, while I was editing this, if everything you built your life on was suddenly put under a stress test, what's the first part that would buckle? The clouds weren't like the ones you see from a plane window. They were heavy. They had a weight to them, like a thick fog that smells like ozone and old rain. As I rose through them, the humming from the glass city was gone, replaced by a silence so thick it made my ears ache. I looked at my hands. They were still my hands, the same scars from a circular saw on my thumb, the same rough calluses, but they were glowing. The light wasn't coming from outside. It was leaking out from under my fingernails. Then I broke through the top of the cloud layer, and that's when I saw the scale of it. The angels. I don't know the right word. They weren't just standing there, they were holding the space together. It was like they were the pillars of the whole universe. Their wings weren't feathers, they were sheets of white fire that snapped and hissed in the wind. And the wind wasn't air, it was praise. I could feel the vibrations of it in my marrow. I tried to stand up, but there was no floor. I was just suspended in the white. He was right there. I didn't see a face at first. It was just the heat. It felt like standing too close to a furnace when the door swings open. I dropped my head. I couldn't look. I felt like a cheap piece of scrap wood tossed into a kiln. I was sure I was going to catch fire and turn to ash right there. He spoke, and it wasn't a voice. It was like a thunderclap that makes the windows in a house rattle. He said, "You were looking at the walls, Kwame." I thought about the fourplex back in Houston. I thought about the way I checked the corners with a square, making sure everything is tight. I thought I was a good builder. I tried to answer, but my throat was full of dry sand. I managed to whisper, "I wanted to see how it was made." He stepped closer. I could see the hem of his robe now. It wasn't white. It was every color at once, moving like water. "But the walls are only as good as the man who stands within them," he said. My stomach dropped. I remembered a Friday night 3 months ago. I'd told my wife I was working late on the Fifth Ward site, but I was actually sitting in a bar, letting the noise drown out the fact that I didn't like who I saw in the mirror. I thought about the times I'd used subpar materials because the supplier was short and I didn't want to fail the deadline. I thought I'd buried those things, but here there was no dirt to bury them in. The fire was shining right through the lies. "I'm not plumb," I said. It was the only thing I could think to say. "I'm out of square." I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was heavy. It felt like the weight of the lumber that crushed me back on the job site, but it didn't hurt. It was a solid, grounding weight. "I am the cornerstone," he said. I looked up then, just for a second. His eyes, they weren't like ours. They were like looking into the heart of a star. There was so much life in them, it made me feel like I was barely a drawing on a piece of paper. He showed me a vision inside the fire. I saw a house. It was built on a massive slab of rock, and the storms were hitting it. The wind was howling, and the digital grid from the city was trying to wrap around it like vines, trying to pull it down. But the house didn't move. Then he showed me another house. This one was beautiful. It had all the glass and the scanners and the luxury. It looked perfect. But when the wind hit it, the ground underneath just turned to soup. It slid away and the whole thing crumpled like a tin can. "The storm is coming to the site," he said. I felt a cold shiver go down my spine, even in all that heat. I knew he wasn't talking about a hurricane in the Gulf. "And I don't know how to build on the rock," I said. I felt like I was going to cry, but my eyes were too dry from the light. "I only know how to pour concrete." He leaned in and the roar of the angels seemed to fade into the background. "The concrete is your pride," he said. "It cracks when the earth moves. You must reach deeper." I didn't understand. I've spent my whole adult life thinking that if you work hard and keep your lines straight, you're doing it right. But he was telling me my lines were all wrong. My whole life was built on a grade that was sloping toward a cliff. I'm Zeke, and I found myself stopping the recording right after Kwame said that line about the concrete being his pride. It's a specific kind of detail that makes this account feel different to me. He isn't being given a theological lecture, he's being given a site correction. I've noticed that in the most credible accounts, the message isn't a slogan. It's something that pulls the rug out from under the person's entire identity. Kwame thought he was a builder. He's being told he's barely started the excavation. He showed me the world again, but it was dark. The blue grid was everywhere now, pulsing like a heartbeat. It was moving into the churches. It was moving into the schools. I saw people being forced to choose, not in a big dramatic way with a gun to their head, but in small ways. Scan your face to get your paycheck. Update your ID to see the doctor. Link your bank to the system or you can't pay the light bill. I saw the fear. It was like a black smoke rising off the cities. People were terrified of being left behind, of being outside the system. They were trading their souls for a sense of security that was going to evaporate the moment the real storm hit. I saw my son. He's only 6. I saw him standing in a line, and there was a man in a suit holding a tablet, waiting for him to step forward. "No," I said. I tried to reach out, but my arms wouldn't move. "Not him." The figure in the fire looked at me, and the sadness in his eyes was heavier than the angel's roar. "The world is preparing the way for a different master," he said, "one who uses the grid to bind what I came to set free." I felt a pressure in my chest, like I was being squeezed. I realized the 8 minutes were running out. I could feel the Houston heat trying to pull me back. I could smell the dust and the pine wood again. "How do I protect him?" I yelled. The white fire was getting so bright I couldn't see his face anymore. "Tell them the foundation is already laid," he said. But I didn't know what that meant. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a job list. I just had this weight in my heart that felt like lead. "Wait," I shouted. "I'm not ready to go back. I don't know what to do." The white fire exploded. The explosion didn't knock me back. It pulled me through. 1 second I was standing in that white roar, and the next, the fire had thinned out into something else. It was like walking into a massive, empty warehouse before the drywall goes up. You can see the bones of the place. You can see how the loads are transferred. I was standing in a space where time didn't seem to have a direction. It was just a series of, I guess you'd call them scenes, but they were more like project files. I saw a man, he was just walking. There wasn't any technology, no digital grid, just open land and a sky that looked like it had never seen a smog cloud. I knew it was Enoch. I didn't have a name tag to look at, but I knew the way you know a specific grade of lumber by the smell of the grain. He was walking with the figure in the fire. They were just talking, moving across the dirt like two partners on a walkthrough. Then Enoch was gone. He didn't fall. He didn't die. The figure just lifted him. It was like he was pulled off the site before the demo crew arrived. And then I saw why. I saw the clouds turn black. I saw the violence in the streets of those ancient cities. It looked exactly like the news footage I see on the break room TV back in Houston. People hurting each other for no reason, people laughing at things that should make you sick. Then I saw a man building a boat. I watched Noah working with gopher wood. I could see the sweat on his back. I could see the way he was following a set of specifications that didn't make any sense to anyone else. People were standing around the perimeter of his site, mocking him. They were pointing at the dry ground and then at his hull, laughing until their faces turned red. But Noah kept his head down. He kept driving the pegs. He was building according to a code that hadn't been tested yet. Then the water came. It wasn't just rain. The ground itself seemed to fracture. I watched the water rise, and I saw the beautiful high-end houses of that world just float away and break apart. Everything that looked solid was actually hollow. Only the boat, the thing built to the strange specification, remained level. The vision shifted again, and I saw Lot. I saw him being pulled out of a city by his arms. The angels weren't asking him if he was ready. They were dragging him. Behind them, the sky was already starting to turn a color I don't have a name for. It was a heat that didn't come from the sun. It was an audit by fire. The figure in the fire stood beside me again. I could feel the vibration of his presence in my teeth. "The patterns do not change, Kwame," he said. I looked at the ancient scenes and then back at the blue digital grid of our world. I saw the connection. It was the same rot, the same structural failure. "The world thinks it is building something new," he said. I thought about the skyscrapers in Dubai and the glass towers in Singapore. I thought about the way we brag about our progress, but they are only painting over the termites, he said. I felt a cold sweat on my neck. I saw the modern world again, but this time I saw the spiritual framing. I saw the churches. They looked like they were built out of soft wood, stuff that hadn't been cured. I saw pastors standing on stages that were built on sand. They were telling people that the building was safe, that they didn't need to worry about the inspection, that the foundation didn't matter as long as the paint was bright. I saw the compromise. It looked like a black mold growing behind the walls. I've been thinking about what Kwame said regarding the rot in the framing. I'm Zeke, and I noticed that his construction background keeps him from seeing the world in metaphors. He sees it as a physical system that is either failing or holding. It reminds me of a message we got from a structural engineer in Chicago a few months back. He said that that a building doesn't fall because of the storm. It falls because of the small cracks that were ignored during the dry season. Kwame is seeing those cracks on a global scale. If you've ever looked at your own life or your own community and realized the foundation wasn't what you thought it was, I'd like to hear how you handled that realization. Drop it in the comments for me. I read every one. I saw a group of people who were different. They were like the man with the flashlight I saw earlier. They weren't building massive monuments to themselves. They were small. They were hidden. They are the ones who follow the specification, the figure said. I saw them praying in kitchens. I saw them refusing to take the digital mark, even when it meant they couldn't go to the movies or use the fast lane at the store. They were being squeezed by the system, but their internal framing was solid. It was made of the same white fire. The time for the final audit is approaching, he said. I felt a jolt of terror. It was like the moment when you realize a crane is tipping and there's nothing you can do but watch it fall. I'm just a guy with a hammer, I said. My voice was cracking. I felt like I was falling apart. Why are you showing me this? I can't fix a whole planet. He looked at me, and for the first time, I felt like he was seeing every cell in my body. You do not fix the planet, he said. I waited for him to finish, but the silence stretched out. I felt like I was being weighed. You fix the man, he said. I thought about the bar. I thought about the lies. I thought about the shortcuts I'd taken. I realized I was part of the rot. I was using the same soft wood I saw in the churches. I don't have the right materials, I whispered. I felt my knees give out. I was on my face in that white space. I have already provided them, he said. I felt his hand on my head. It was the same weight as before, but this time it felt like it was pinning me to a rock. I could feel the Houston sun through the white space. I could hear the beeping of a heart monitor, but it sounded a million miles away. The grid is a shadow, Kwame, he said. Do not fear the shadow, fear the one who casts it. I saw a final image. It was a city, but not the one made of humming glass. This one was gold, but it wasn't the fake gold of Dubai. This was solid, it was heavy, it was perfectly square. It was the most level thing I'd ever seen. Build for this city, he said. The white fire started to pull me back. I felt my chest begin to burn. Not with the fire of the vision, but with a sharp, stabbing pain that felt like a nail being driven through my ribs. Wait, I tried to grab his robe. What do I tell my son? Tell him to watch the foundation, his voice said. But it wasn't in my head anymore. It was echoing in a cold, sterile room. I felt my heart jump, thump. The pain was back. The heat was back. The dust was back. The sound came first. It wasn't the roar of the angels. It was a high-pitched, mechanical scream, a long, flat note that felt like a needle being driven into my ear. Then the cold hit. I went from the white fire into a space that felt like a meat locker. My skin didn't just feel chilly, it felt like it was being flayed by ice. I tried to inhale, but my lungs were stuck. They felt like a pair of old, dry bellows that had sat in a garage for 20 years. I heard a voice. It was frantic. It wasn't the thunder of the figure in the fire. It was a woman, and she was shouting clear. My chest didn't just hurt, it exploded. I felt my ribs snap. I literally heard the sound like a dry branch breaking under a boot. My whole body arched off the table. I wasn't floating anymore. I was back in the meat. I was back in the bone. I was pinned to that hospital bed by the sheer weight of gravity, and it felt like the entire fourplex I'd been framing was sitting on my sternum. We have a rhythm, someone said. I opened my eyes. The ceiling was white, but it was the wrong kind of white. It was fluorescent. It was sterile. It had those tiny little holes in the acoustic tiles that I've installed 1,000 times. I started counting them. I didn't know what else to do. I just focused on the grid of the ceiling tiles because it was the only thing that stayed still. My wife was there. I couldn't see her at first, but I could hear her breathing. It was a jagged, wet sound. I tried to turn my head toward her, but my neck wouldn't move. I felt something warm on my cheek. I thought it was the white fire for a second, but then I realized it was just a tear. My own tear. I hadn't even known I was crying. The doctor was leaning over me. He had a mask on, but I could see his eyes. They were tired. He looked at me like I was a problem he'd finally solved, not a person. "You're back, Kwame," he said. I wanted to tell him that I hadn't been gone. I wanted to tell him about the glass city and the blue lines and the angels made of brass, but my throat was raw. It felt like I'd been swallowing hot coals. I just gripped the side of the bed. My fingers found the metal rail, and I held on until my knuckles turned white. They kept me in the ICU for 4 days. The doctors came in with their tablets and their clipboards. They talked about my heart like it was a pump with a faulty valve. They used words like ischemia and ventricular fibrillation. They looked at the monitors and the digital readouts. Every time they brought a tablet near me, I could see the blue light of the screen reflecting in their glasses. I couldn't stop looking for the strings. I was waiting for the blue light to snap across my face like it did in the glass city. I was waiting for the system to identify me, to tag me, to tell me if I was allowed to be there. I looked at the nurses' station. They have these scanners now where they use their badges and then their fingerprints to get into the med cart. I watched the green light flash every time they did it. Zip. Click. I'm back on a job site now. It's a small residential build over in the Heights. The sun is just coming up, and the air is still cool enough that you can breathe without feeling like you're inhaling soup. I'm standing on the slab, looking at the layout. The plumbers have already been here. The pipes are sticking up out of the concrete like gray fingers. I reach for my belt. My hand goes to the same spot it always does. I pull out my tape measure. It's a heavy 25-foot Fat Max. The casing is scuffed up and there's a bit of dried mud on the clip. I hook the end of the tape on the edge of the slab. I pull it back and the sound of the metal sliding out, that shh sound, it feels too loud in the morning air. I look at the numbers. They're clear. Black ink on yellow steel. 1 inch, 2 inches, 3. I know it's just a tool. It's just a way to make sure the walls go up where they're supposed to go. But I look at the increments and I think about the grid. I think about the way the figure in the fire told me that nothing built by man is level. I find myself checking the hook at the end of the tape. I make sure the rivets are tight. I pull it to the first mark and I stop. My thumb is shaking. I can't make it stay still. I just stand there on the wet concrete, holding the tape at 12 feet, 4 inches, and I don't move for a long time. I just keep my eyes on the yellow steel and the dust in the Houston air. I read through the final part of Kwame's account 3 times before I sat down to record this. I'm Zeke, and I keep coming back to that image of him standing on a wet slab in Houston, holding a tape measure he doesn't quite trust anymore. There's something about the way he describes the audit that feels less like a vision and more like he's looking at a structural failure in our own timeline. I've noticed a pattern across the messages that come into near-death experiences lately. People from Singapore, from London, from New York, all describing this same sense that the digital architecture is closing in. I was looking at a report from a tech firm yesterday about the rollout of biometric gateways in major airports, and they used the exact same word Kwame used. They called it a universal grid. Kwame saw that grid while his heart was stopped for 8 minutes in the Texas heat. He saw the foundation being poured for a world where your own face is the only currency you have left. If that's the build we're moving into, I don't know what happens to the people who don't fit the specifications. I just think about Kwame standing there, trying to find something level in a world he saw falling apart, still holding on to that Fat Max.